Welcome to part 4 of chapter 2. In this part, we will talk about project phases and project life cycle. So what is a project life cycle? Well, any project, any IT, any telecommunications project, or any other project that you take, it goes through certain phases or high-level steps, okay? So a project life cycle can be defined as a collection of various high-level project phases that every project goes through. And this collection of phases describes such things for each phase as what work will be performed in each phase, what deliverables will be produced and when. For example, what kind of documents or what kind of product deliverables will be produced at each state. For example, a business case is an example of a document, or a requirements database is also something that's related to documentation or records, or a prototype, a product prototype, or a beta version can be an example of a product-oriented deliverable. So depending on which phase you're talking about, that phase will have specific deliverables, either in relation to documentation or in relation to the product that you're trying to deliver as a result of the entire project, or something else related to that phase. Also, each phase is different in terms of the stakeholder involvement. Different people may be involved with the project in different phases. And also, collectively, this project lifecycle model describes how management controls and approves work within each specific phase. In other words, what kind of managerial techniques or control techniques are used for each of the phases. Now, deliverables, meaning the things that each of those phases produces, are of special interest for this course because this course is largely an overview, at least when it comes to the group project that you'll be doing in this, or individual project that you'll be doing in this course. It's largely an overview of all the deliverables that are typically produced during various phases of a project lifecycle. Now, there are many takes on how a project lifecycle should look like. In other words, there are many frameworks, there are many different alternative ideas. But all in all, most experts would agree that there are two broad phases when it comes to project lifecycle. The first phase is project feasibility phase, where you do analysis and planning, and then you have project acquisition phase, when you go ahead and implement your project. And under those phases, you can have the following sub-phases. The concept definition phase, where you come up with an idea for a project, and those are the kind of deliverables that you will submit. For example, a business case, which is a document that justifies initiation of a project from a business standpoint. Preliminary cost estimates, meaning a rough draft of the overall budget for the project. And then second level work breakdown structure. It means a high level sketch of the kind of steps that you need to go through to fully implement that project. So that's concept, like in the initial concept phase. Then you have development phase, where you do detailed planning, where you produce a detailed project management plan. It's probably the most important deliverable from that phase. Then you provide more realistic and more granular budgetary cost estimates. And then you add some details to the work breakdown structure as well by moving from the second level to the third level. Third level means you have one more level of detail added. Implementation phase, this is when you go ahead and implement the project. So you have definite cost estimates, you have performance reports, you have work packages, and then the closeout phase. And what you do during the closeout phase, you formally deliver the project, you ensure customer acceptance, and then you try to learn something for yourself as well, meaning each project needs to be a learning mechanism so that you improve your performance as a project manager, and you improve your performance of your team members next time you work on a project. So those are the high-level steps. Now, just some additional information about project phases. In early phases of a project life cycle, resources needs are usually the lowest. You're not expending any resources, you're just planning. The level of uncertainty or risk is the highest because sometimes you don't know what needs to be done until you actually start doing it. So there's a lot of uncertainty as to what exactly needs to be done, how you should go about implementing certain steps, and so forth. And this is the phase where project stakeholders have the greatest opportunity to influence the project. Now, this is the phase where everybody needs to submit, all the stakeholders, all the relevant stakeholders need to submit their inputs, because after that phase, it's very costly and time-consuming to do any kind of changes to the requirements list or to the original scope statement. Now, in middle phases of a project, meaning during the implementation phase, the certainty of completing a project improves. So when you start doing something, then that's when you actually start seeing how feasible this overall project is, when you're likely to complete it, and how to go about implementing certain steps or certain technologies. Of course, more resources are needed because that's where you consume the most resources during the implementation phase. And also another relationship here is that you need to spend quite a bit of time planning so that you minimize mistakes and wastage of resources during the implementation phase. There is a famous saying that goes something like that: if I had 7 days to cut a tree, I would spend 6 days sharpening my axe, right? So that's where you sharpen your axe, and this is where you go ahead and cut trees. If you didn't spend enough time selecting the right kind of tools and fine-tuning and sharpening those tools, then you will end up wasting a lot of time and resources here during the implementation phase. And then during the final phase of a project lifecycle, you need to focus on ensuring that project requirements were met, that you have final approval, final acceptance from the project sponsor, and also lessons learned. This is where you cannot change anything, everything is done already. The only thing you can do is just to learn from your past mistakes. So those are like some additional considerations for doing work in those three main high-level phases. Now, don't confuse project lifecycle with product lifecycle. I mean, any project involves ultimately developing a final product or some kind of service. But the concept of product lifecycle that probably comes mostly from marketing is a bit different from a project lifecycle. So there's a little overlap, but those are different frameworks. Also, you may want to look up something called Systems Development Lifecycle or SDLC model. This framework is fundamental to several fields. I think it's number one framework in the field of MIS, Management Information Systems or Computer Information Systems, because it adopts the so-called socio-technical approach to explain how to go about developing information systems. So there is a lot of overlap between project lifecycle and system development lifecycle framework. And there are some variations of that SDLC framework. If you Google it, you will see some alternative explanations. But the steps that SDLC contains are similar, from one framework to another, and they're also parallel to the steps that we just discussed previously here. Now, when it comes to system development lifecycle or project lifecycle, I would say there are two broad approaches or philosophies: predictive approach or waterfall approach, and adaptive or agile approach. And we're going to talk about some details here. Now, predictive approach is also called waterfall model. The key characteristic of a predictive or waterfall model or approach to project management or information system development is that this approach has a set of well-defined linear stages of system development and support. So the idea here is that during the early phases of a project, during the concept and planning phases, you can sit down and you can sketch all those steps that you need to go through to deliver a project. So you'll say, I need to go step A, then go through step B, C, and D. Now we have only 4 steps, but in reality, this could involve hundreds or if not thousands of steps. So you plan the steps that you need to go through from concept to final delivery of a product. And then when the project goes, when you go about implementing the project, then you proceed through those steps in a linear fashion. You go from A to B, from B to C, and from C to D. So you flow your workflows from one step to another step to another step, from the beginning to the end. And that's why it's called a waterfall model, because there's this one dimensionality, there's this direction. So work goes as planned in one direction. So that's predictive models or predictive approaches to project management or information system development. Now, of course, some people may disagree with this philosophy, with this approach. They may say something like this: well, the first thing is that nobody is smart enough to sit down in the early phases of a project and wrap his or her head around the entire project and outline all those steps. Even if somebody tries it, then life is very unpredictable. You thought you need to do B and then C, but in reality, after B, you did N, and after N you did M, and then you came back to C, right? And then after C you had to go back to A because you realized you made some mistakes there. So what some people say, it's sometimes, especially for complex or innovative project, risky projects, it's impossible to plan things with this kind of level of detail and certainty. So instead, they resort to adaptive models, or I think a more common term for that, agile models of project management. And there are many terms for agile, like spiral model, incremental build-up model, prototyping model, and rapid application development. So those are like specific methodologies or approaches to agile development, in my opinion. But agility emphasizes typical iterations, small steps. You're not planning too far ahead. You're just trying to do small steps at a time. Also, agile approach is not very rigid. It's not predictive. In other words, you're welcome to kind of step back and forth or sideways, to reiterate certain things, to repeat certain steps. So I guess it's a more messy approach, but some people would argue that this is how real life works. Real life does not proceed in those nice, well-defined steps. It's more about Brownian motion, moving back and forth, changing plans all the time, adjusting plans all the time. So I think agile approach is becoming a bit more common, especially when it comes to innovative, high-risk startup environments where people do not quite understand themselves what they're doing. So, but nevertheless, predictive or waterfall model is still used, especially in well established, mature organizations, large organizations, the organizations who want to minimize risk, who want to have certain level of certainty about future, about what they're doing in the future, and so forth. And also, I would say that one of the top methodologies in agile software development is the so-called Scrum methodology. So it's spelled like this, Scrum. One of some of the websites that you can visit to learn about Scrum are provided here. And also, this course has a section under that subheader of a group project where you can learn more about Scrum, where you can learn more about Scrum from the original creator of Scrum methodology, which is Jeff Sutherland. So in this section, you can find you can find such things. I'll show you in a second. Well, you can find such, just go to our course canvas page, and there you will see a subheading under the group project where we have, let me show you here. Yeah, where we have a subheading called Scrum. So this is where you can, watch a video where Jeff Sutherland talks about some fundamental assumptions behind Scrum philosophy. Make sure you read the Scrum guide. It's like a small document, 16 pages, that outlines the essence of Scrum methodology. If you want to get more information, additional detail, then please read the Scrum handbook, which is an extended version of Scrum guide. And then watch this video, Scrum Explained in 10 minutes, that tells you how Scrum is used in software development companies for managing development teams. So yeah, learn about Scrum, and here you have all kinds of resources about this. There are also a number of certification bodies that offer people formal certification in Scrum, Agile. Scrum Alliance is probably one of the most well-known ones. So if you go to Scrum Alliance, you'll see information about their certifications as well. Okay, friends, so this completes part 4 of our Chapter 2 presentation. Thank you for listening.